Perfect. Okay, so good morning. Like I said, allow me to introduce myself. I am Teddy Ruge, co-founder of Hive Colab. I'm here today to present the preliminary findings from our upcoming EdTech baseline study. This is going to be just a brief insight into what the numbers tell us, what the evidence is telling us, and how it's going to guide the design of our program and the implementation of the innovations that are going to be partaking in cohort 1. The cornerstone of evidence guiding our design and delivery of this Mastercard Foundation EdTech Fellowship here in Uganda. But before diving into the data, let's set the stage a little bit. This wasn't just an exercise that we just decided to do. It was commissioned to ensure we build on real evidence rather than assumptions. We needed to find out what is actually out there, in what condition is it in, before we actually continue building. The evidence was needed. So today's findings will shape our investment strategies, prioritization of projects, and success measurements over the next 3 years. For those unfamiliar with us, Hive Colab is Uganda's co-working and innovation hub. For over 12 years, we've been at the heart of the country's digital economy, acting as an ecosystem accelerator that transforms ambitious ideas into scalable solutions. Barbara and I have been very steadfast on being at the forefront of emerging technologies and making sure that we accelerate the founders that are going to be shaping our digital economies locally. What we offer beyond physical infrastructure, high-speed internet and professional workspace, is the entire ecosystem. This includes connections, a supportive community, and a proven track record of nurturing over 1,000 tech entrepreneurs at every stage over that period of time. Our partnership with the Mastercard Foundation to deliver this fellowship is a natural extension of our core mission. We've committed to supporting 36 EdTech ventures over the program's lifetime, collectively reaching nearly 1 million learners, to be precise, around 864,000. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be massive impact. A round of applause just for that number. Because the founders in this room are going to set the stage for EdTech and learning in this country and pioneer new ways for inclusive building and development of interventive technology. So this fellowship aligns perfectly with our broader vision, a novel accelerator model built on collaborative development, evaluation, and scaling of ideas. A little bit on this background, this fellowship and its purpose. Some context. The Mastercard Foundation EdTech Fellowship is a flagship initiative under the Young Africa Works initiative or strategy. This strategy aims to enable 30 million young Africans to access dignified and fulfilling work by 2030. In Uganda specifically, the fellowship focuses on 3 key areas: strengthening equitable access to quality education, improving youth skills development, and unlocking pathways to dignified work for historically marginalized populations. The program is structured as a 3-year engagement. This includes a 12-month accelerator phase each of the next 3 years, and up to 24 months of follow-up support for each of our founders. We'll work with 12 ventures, as I said, per cohort across those 3 years. Crucially, this program prioritizes inclusion from the outset. It's built into the design of the program. It's not an add-on, it's not a nice-to-have, it's a must-have. Young women, refugees, and youth with disabilities are not simply afterthoughts. They are central to the design intent. This isn't a program that supports EdTech for its own sake. Instead, it asks, does this technology actually reach the learners who need it most? This question absolutely underpins everything this baseline study was set out to investigate. So this was commissioned during the pre-acceleration phase, deliberately so. We wanted to avoid designing a program based on assumptions and instead anchor our strategy in evidence. This study makes a significant contribution by moving beyond theoretical possibilities. Uganda holds immense potential, as previous speakers this morning have stated, in EdTech, but promise alone doesn't reveal the structural gap, marginalized groups, or actual infrastructure challenges that our founders are going to face. Therefore, we embarked on a mission to map the technological and infrastructural landscape of Uganda's education sector. Our focus was on marginalized groups such as girls, learners with disabilities, refugees, and youth in remote areas to understand their unique challenges. Ultimately, this study establishes a benchmark for us. Every future milestone in the fellowship, every venture we support, and every learner we claim to reach will be measured against the current state of affairs. Think of this as the before picture. We'll revisit this shortly. Now, the objective of this study was structured around 5 specific objectives, all contributing to a single overarching goal. A comprehensive as-is baseline of Uganda's EdTech ecosystem. We have to know where the starting line is. Firstly, we sought to understand the current reality of EdTech in Uganda, focusing on the actual practices rather than strategy documents. Secondly, we developed an EdTech readiness index examining 5 key contexts: the school environment, teacher context, learner context, device context, and connectivity context. Each context provides a distinct perspective. Thirdly, we analyze the supply side, assessing the maturity levels, business models, and operational capacity of local EdTech ventures. Fourthly, we conducted an inclusion assessment specifically examining the barriers faced by young women, girls, persons with disabilities, rural communities, and underserved populations like refugee camps. Finally, we assessed alignment with national policy frameworks and provided recommendation for bridging the gap between policy intent and the classroom reality. That one is extremely important. We cannot create policy if we don't understand what lies on the ground. So the methodology that we used was crucial, and the context here is significant. This study was undertaken against the backdrop of Uganda's 2025 political climate and the upcoming January 2026 election. So given these dynamics, we made a deliberate choice to employ a rapid desk review as our primary approach. This allowed us to proceed swiftly, rigorously, and safely, avoiding the delays and risks associated with large-scale field data collected during a politically sensitive period. The desk review was also the logical choice for another reason. Schools were closed during this time. Students and learners were on holiday, making direct survey work impractical. However, we managed to complement the desk review with a highly targeted and valuable component: structured baseline survey with EdTech entrepreneurs in the country. Specifically, we engaged our Hive Colab alumni community and ventures from other innovation hubs. These founders are living the reality of the ecosystem firsthand. So it's imperative that we actually reach out to them and have them provide insight into this ecosystem. The review itself drew upon Uganda Vision 2040, the National Development Plan 4 from the Ministry of Education, Sports, and the Ministry of ICT, and a variety of donor-led research. While it's secondary data, it's meticulously curated, systematic, and policy anchored. The combination of desk review and targeted founder surveys provided us with both macro level as well as nuanced on-the-ground perspective. The as-is state, we'll just look at the big picture for now and not really go into detail due to time. I'll be straightforward. The picture is sobering but also enlightening in what our foundings revealed. Uganda boasts a population of around 46 million, with over 50% of the population under 18. So a very young and ripe ecosystem for EdTech innovation. This demographic demonstrates this demographic characteristic is often referred to as a youth bulge, and it presents a substantial opportunity contingent upon effective investment. But here's the challenge. Despite a 91% primary school enrollment rate, which looks impressive on paper, the system leaks badly. Only 35% of students finish primary school, and by the time they reach tertiary education, only almost 7% of the relevant age group is actually enrolled. So what happens to the rest? Well, 60% enter subsistence agriculture, where about 70% of our working age adults, that is the occupation of available to them. While 75% working youth are in precarious informal labor. Youth unemployment now exceeds 17%. Furthermore, there is a persistent gender gap, 82% of male literacy compared to only 71% female literacy. And this conclusion is stark, ladies and gentlemen. EdTech intervention is not a nice to have for Uganda. It's an absolute structural necessity. Without it, the gap between school enrollment and dignified work will continue to widen. This is the landscape this fellowship is actually entering. This is the best baseline that we're working from, and we must actually understand. I will touch a little bit on teacher readiness index. In general, most of the teachers were not very comfortable or conversant with EdTech in the classroom, whether it was for preparation of materials, grading of materials, or actually using it to teach students. School leaders are actively engaged in teacher ITC competency, where 71% of principals involve teachers in ICT planning, and 72 facilitate discussions about the benefits or challenges of technology in the classroom. Furthermore, 94% of leaders prioritize ICT as a tool for enhancing learner outcomes. This fosters a supportive leadership culture. However, how does this translate into practice? What we found that was among teachers, 50% used digital tools to search for content, 53% share materials with peers, and 43% of them to expand their subject knowledge. Essentially, teachers are utilizing technology primarily for their professional development and content sourcing. The takeaway is that teachers are engaged users of technology for themselves, but the gap widens when it comes to facilitating digital learning for students. This is critical professional development frontier. Now for the learners, in terms of context, only 22% search for information during lessons using digital tools, and just 12% create digital content like presentations or videos. This is critical. Outside of school, only 12% use educational apps and just 10% complete homework on digital devices. So we can see the divide is extremely wide, but it also creates a fertile ground for innovation there. Foundational digital literacy is a prerequisite, absolutely not an add-on. If we can look at the geographical scope, and I think this is where we get to the heart of inclusivity. Two quick important data points that you actually need to look at. Geographically, the central region, particularly Greater Kampala, has a high concentration of EdTech solutions. That's Kampala, Wakiso, and Mukono dominate, while coverage beyond this capital is relatively even but very, very sparse. This matters greatly for the fellowship aiming to reach underserved communities. Urban-centric solutions alone won't solve rural access problems. We must be able to reach the last mile of development in every corner of the country. So, however, a rising tide alone doesn't guarantee everyone benefits. So structural inequities persist, and the intentional program design is actually crucial in order to actually make sure that we are reaching those that are mostly underserved. And in that effort, we identified three critical gaps that we need to actually be able to address as I get ready to conclude. One was language. the other was connectivity, and the third one is inclusion. The English dominance is a significant issue. All surveyed EdTech solutions are English only. For a fellowship focused on underserved communities, many of whom speak local languages and dialects as the primary language, this is not a minor problem. Localization is not a luxury. It's a prerequisite for equity. Adrian mentioned equity. We must build for equity, and this is where it starts. This is the landscape that we must solve for in order to achieve equity. Second, hybrid accessibility is a positive development. 83% of solutions offer both online and offline functionality. This indicates that most ventures are already considering connectivity constraints. The opportunity here is to leverage and scale this, but making offline first a competitive standard, not an exception. Refugee access gap presents significant challenges. While 89% of solutions haven't reached refugee populations, despite intent and some solutions being architecturally designed for refugees in mind, the operational gap remains substantial. So that's why this fellowship, with inclusivity at the core of its design, will make it possible for our founders to be able to reach those most underserved communities, especially refugees. Now let's talk about inclusion and equity more in general with a gender, disability, and cost lens. Regarding gender, access to technology isn't solely about device availability. It's also influenced by household power dynamics. Parents may prioritize digital literacy for male children, raising concerns about girls' unsupervised internet access, sometimes genuine and sometimes unfounded. But the consequences of that is that girls experience less screen time and lower confidence with digital tools, even when devices are technically accessible. Youth with disabilities, we must not forget, face compounded barriers. When EdTech platforms aren't designed with universal design for learning principles, they actively exclude rather than simply failing to include. Without affordable integrated assistive technology, these gaps will continue widening even further, especially if you remember that about 50% of our population is under 18. Designing for those less able is an absolute necessity. Finally, cost is another barrier. For refugees and low-income rural families, the total cost of ownership for EdTech deters them. This isn't about the device. It's about the data, bundles, hardware repairs, and software subscriptions. These recurring costs create a significant and often insurmountable barrier for the most vulnerable families. As I discussed earlier, we must test rigorously against these barriers to inclusivity, and we must also make sure that from a design perspective, we design from the bottom up rather than designing from the center and trying to reach the margins. If we look at inclusion and equity from a linguistic perspective and teacher readiness, linguistic exclusion is a significant issue, as I've discussed. And a substantial portion of global EdTech content is delivered in English or dominant international languages. This absolutely creates a cognitive barrier, especially in rural communities and refugee camps. We previously noted that 100% of surveyed ventures are English only. This isn't sustainable for a fellowship aiming to reach the most underserved learners in Uganda. In terms of teacher readiness, a teacher uncomfortable with a device can't effectively model digital learning for their students. Given that teachers are often the most trusted adults in a child's education, their discomfort becomes a barrier for students. So founders, as we are innovating and development, we must not forget to include and train the trainers in this ecosystem. It is absolutely critical to completing the circle of inclusion. Now, if we're talking about physical awareness, barriers for PWDs, I'd like to highlight the final inclusion dimensions concerning people with disabilities. This group faces compounding set of barriers. Environmental and spatial barriers are often overlooked in EdTech design discussions, but are very, very real, as we found. Inaccessible physical spaces such as school buildings, learning centers, and even homes for remote learning determine where people with disabilities can navigate and participate. If the space isn't accessible, the technology within it becomes irrelevant. So we must design with these communities in hand to really understand what are the real problems and the barriers to inclusive education. So most EdTech solutions are developed in isolation without meaningful consultation with people with disabilities during the design phase. This isn't a resource problem, it's a process issue. Inclusive design requires inclusive design processes. Founders, write that down. Inclusive design requires inclusive design processes. Once more, inclusive design requires inclusive design processes. Let me be a professor for once. Are we together? Are we together? Then we understand each other. So finally, let me talk about briefly about policy alignment in this effort that we're trying to. The fellowship operates within a national policy framework, and alignment with it is both a requirement and a strategic asset. The Mastercard Foundation EdTech Fellowship operates at the intersection of three critical government mandates: the education sector, the technology and innovation sector, and the workforce and economic development sector. These are critical to the entirety of the ecosystem. First, we must align with the education sector through the Ministry of Education and Sports. This ensures EdTech solutions connect directly to curriculum delivery and formal learning environments that are strengthening existing systems rather than building parallel ones. Second, we engage with the technology and innovative sector through the Ministry of ICT and National Guidance as partners. This involves participating in the National Digital Framework, supporting the growth of local startup ecosystems, and ensuring ventures contribute to Uganda's digital economy. Third and finally, we focus on workforce and economic development through Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. This pillar addresses the human impact, ensuring digital literacy, skills acquisition lead to improved learner outcomes and real employment opportunities. Crucially, it enforces equity through gender parity, rural access and inclusion of learners with disabilities. If you allow me to paraphrase, if you want to go fast, you go alone. You're going to crash along the way, but you will be going fast, but you will not be inclusive. If you want us to go together, this is the danger of paraphrasing. I think you know where I'm going with that. These three mandates are mutually reinforcing, and the fellowship is equally positioned to connect them, to collect them all. So, in summary, this study provides a credible policy and technology strikes again. This study provides a credible and policy-aligned and evidence-based foundation for the Mastercard Foundation EdTech Fellowship in Uganda. It doesn't tell us what we wish were true, but rather what is true. Three pressing constraints the fellowship must address for all partners as well as founders who are working here. The scarcity of patient capital, where ventures need funding that doesn't demand returns before they've had to build. The urgent need for inclusive design capabilities. Technical skills is not enough. And the persistent implementation gap within government systems where policy ambition outpaces practical execution. That's why this baseline study was actually done, is because we really do need to understand where we're starting from. What is the starting line, as opposed to just starting the race without understanding where we are coming from. So as of March 2026, this study serves as a definitive baseline. Every data point represents a commitment to measuring, tracking, and demonstrating the fellowship's real impact on learners who need it the most. Hive Colab and our partners are prepared to undertake this work, and we are grateful to the Mastercard Foundation for their trust and the investment. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause to all of our partners. So finally, if you'd like a copy of this full baseline report, while this was a preview of what is coming in the full report, kindly get in touch with us. But we do estimate that it should be available by the end of May. Thank you once again.